Is there life after sexual abuse? Yes.
You've really been talking about it ever since.
I feel like I'm a voice for the voiceless of those who've been sexually abused.
Is there peace? Is there hope? Yes.
When you finally have the freedom to talk about it and to work on the healing, it's like you can breathe again.
Can a relationship thrive after childhood sexual abuse? Yes, it can.
God has a bigger plan, and I know that He'll redeem anything.
Today on Joni, you'll find out how and why. Next.
Well, we continue our series on childhood sexual abuse with prolific author and director of One Voice Enterprises, Nicole Bromley. Childhood sexual abuse is perhaps the greatest of all crimes. It is one that the victim deals with for their entire life. You see, the physical wounds heal rather quickly, but the emotional damage stays with you. And without proper help and guidance, childhood sexual abuse can be the death of every intimate relationship, not to mention the cause of a whole host of other devastating problems. Today, we want to help break the cycle of abuse and promote healing with practical advice, coping mechanisms, and most importantly, we want to let those suffering know there is hope. Sexual abuse can take away your breath, so it's time to learn to breathe again. Please welcome survivor and national spokesperson, Nicole Bromley. Well, we talked about your first book yesterday, which was Hush, and this is your second book entitled Breathe. What's the difference between the two?
Well, Hush takes you on the journey of moving from silence to healing, going through things like forgiveness and realizing it's not your fault and making a difference.
And talking about it, shining the light on it.
Breaking the silence is the first step to healing.
Yes.
But the fact is healing is a lifelong journey, and it doesn't stop when you've gone through those 4 steps in Hush. And sexual abuse will impact your relationships, and it's important to work through that and to thrive in our relationships, and that's why I wrote Breathe.
There are people who are watching who have maybe suffered sexual abuse. Maybe they're adults, and maybe they've never dealt with it. Is this a book that would really minister to them?
I think so. So many times that's when we recognize that we need to deal with our sexual abuse, is when we see how it's affecting our marriage, or see how it's affecting our relationship with our children, or understand that we're isolating ourselves, we're not in community, we're afraid, or we have addictions. These are the kinds of things that cause us to recognize the root wound is the fact that we've been victims of sexual abuse. And now I want to be better in my relationships. I want to be healthy and live a great adult life. I want to make a difference and minister to others. That's the book for them.
Here is an email that you received. You talk about in the book. Recently, I received an email that touched my heart. And this is what this young lady wrote. Dawn wrote, "I felt the same way inside as I do when I watch a movie and something happens on the screen that seems so real. I realize that I've been holding my breath and I finally begin to breathe again. It's a moment when it feels as if the truth is supposed to be out there in the open for everyone to see. Embarrassment or fear isn't able to creep into my mind because I'm not thinking about the people around me. I'm focused only what's in front of me and what's inside of me." Now, have you found this with a lot of the victims, that it's almost like they've been holding their breath?
Exactly. Dawn was at one of my speaking engagements, and she didn't know who was coming to speak to her that day in chapel. And when she heard my story, it was like freedom. Finally, someone else has gone through what I've been through. Someone understands what I'm feeling as a result. And that's how it is for a lot of people, that you suffocate yourself because you're afraid of talking. You're afraid of being real about your pain or what's been going on in your life. And when you finally have the freedom to talk about it and to work on the healing, it's like you can breathe again. And
so now, for those who didn't see the show yesterday, Nicole shared with us how that she was molested by her stepfather for literally a decade. If you would, just recap your story real quick, and then we're going to talk about how to help those that have gone through sexual abuse and life after it. So tell us your story quickly.
Well, I grew up in what people called the perfect family, the perfect home, the perfect neighborhood.
It all looked perfect.
It did. It was a small town. We were well known. I was very involved in school, straight A student, homecoming queen, captain of the basketball team, all of these things. No one would have suspected that underneath all of that, I was masking. The truth was I was confused, I was scared, I was being sexually abused by my stepdad from the ages of 5 to 14. I told my mom when I was 14, she believed me. We were in hiding. My stepfather committed suicide a week later.
And you've really been talking about it ever since, because you realize the impact that it has made on so many individuals to bring about healing for others who are not talking about
Right. I feel like I'm a voice for the voiceless of those who've been sexually abused, to help them find the courage to break the silence themselves. As hard as it was for me to talk about it, I realize that there's countless others who have not spoken about it. You know, from little kids to, 80-some-year-old women in churches who tell me their story for the first time. It's so freeing to be able to say, me too. And that's my ministry.
Now, one of the stories in the book, Breathe, we're talking about finding freedom to thrive in relationships after childhood sexual abuse. This is something a lot of people don't talk about, is that once you've talked about it, that there is a process of healing that must continue in restoration, because for those who don't forgive, for those who don't go on to get involved in a good church and build healthy relationships around them, they can many times fall into the trap of sexual addiction, alcohol, drug, and et cetera, et cetera. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, easily fall into those things. I've seen how our inner wounds turn to outer wounds through all of those things you've mentioned, among many others. And it's a way to numb the pain. And a lot of times we get into counseling because of those secondary wounds, and we work on, I'm not going to cut anymore, I'm not going to stop looking at pornography, but really we need to look at what the root wound is, and that's the fact that you were molested when you were a little kid, and let's work through that.
So how do you work through it? How did you work through it?
Well, it began with breaking the silence. I believe that's the first step to healing. I had to talk about it. I had to work through that. I had to recognize the lies I believed about myself.
And what were some of those lies?
I believed I was dirty, worthless, that I asked for it.
That you participated,
Yep.
that you enjoyed it.
I did, yep, all of those things.
Yeah.
And
you
also,
were just as guilty as he.
because we were doing it, then we were both at fault.
And
That's
those
what
were
I
all
believed.
lies that the enemy spoke to you and brought condemnation and shame.
And I needed to talk about it with godly, healthy people to be able to speak truth back to me. Nicole, you were a child. This was your stepfather's sin put upon you. You couldn't ask for this. You're not dirty.
What about those people, and you talk about it in the book, who have repressed memories? I know there are some people who say, oh, well, they think people are making that up, or how could they have no memory and all of a sudden it comes back? What have you found in interviewing and talking to the people that you have?
We do. We push these things away. Almost maybe God gives us this defense mechanism to protect little kids from the overwhelming trauma of sexual abuse. And then when you're in a safe place later in life, maybe something triggers it. Maybe you have a child that reaches the age you were when you were abused. That can trigger the memories of what had happened to you, and now they come out full circle. And that's really hard, especially if you're now in a marriage and your husband's like, what is going on? Who is this woman I'm married to? It can really cause a lot of drama, but I think it's important to recognize that now you are safe. Now God's allowing you to remember these things for a reason, for healing.
And talking about it is vital.
It is.
So for the people that you've talked with and interacted with that have not talked about it, what are the repercussions from that?
Well, there's so much shame, just internalized. It can come out in so many different ways. I mean, just anger with your family, and highs and lows in life, and feeling disgust towards yourself, not trusting men. All of these kinds of things can come out. And I dealt with many of them, and that's why we have to talk about it, to be able to acknowledge what the lies are, to illuminate them, and to bring truth into them, find scripture to replace them, and so that you can thrive in your life and in relationships.
Well, we talked about why and what has to change. After the break, we're going to continue to talk about the how, coping, healing, restoration. We're back with Nicole and Breathe in a moment.